All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining today's meeting, and I'd like to call it to order. It's shortly after 9:30 this morning. Declarations of interest. I don't think there's any motions at this time, but we'll see if there's anything so far. Guess not. We do have a number of presentations this morning. 9:45, the Ontario Barn Preservation presentation. I guess we're a little early for that. Are we holding on?
Yes, I think Scott Taylor from our planning department will at least start with the forest management bylaw, and Mr. Wilson will join us for 9:45.
All right, Scott, you're there. Could you might as well fill us in? Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mr. Chair, and good to see all the members of the committee here this morning. So I just wanted to give everybody a quick update on the update to the county's forest management bylaw. We had talked just briefly about this at the last meeting and noted that we were going out to a joint meeting with our friends at the town of Blue Mountains. So I thought I'd give a bit of an update on where we're at on it, as well as some of the feedback we've heard so far. And I should note we are still open to any further feedback, but with respect to the meeting that was held with the town, there was a good attendance and lots of comments, and we've had some comments that have filtered in since then as well. So I thought I might just provide a brief summary here of some of what we've heard, and some of the comments will relate back to agriculture and farming, and some may relate more specifically to development across the county. But here's some of the comments that we heard. Certainly it was noted that we need to make sure that the bylaw aligns with other regulations, whether they be planning documents like official plans or zoning bylaws, or other provincial regulations in that regard. And we need to consider, of course, both the county level and the municipal level across Grey County in that regard. There was some comments received to suggest that we need to place more emphasis on protecting tree lines and fence rows. And that these features should not be exempt from the bylaw in terms of clearing those features as they currently are in the current version of the bylaw. Some people pointed us to some other municipal approaches from across the province. So that was very appropriate in terms of other things we could look at in developing a revised bylaw in that regard. We heard comments with respect to development, and in looking at new development applications, we should be looking to preserve as many trees as we can, and it should not just be clearing the slate when looking at new development applications. We heard the comments about the need for increased fines. So when there is an infraction against the bylaw, we need to really set an example and be sure that people can't just cut and then pay the fines afterwards as a cost of doing business, so to speak. There were some comments to suggest that this role shouldn't be under the planning department in terms of our own county structure. Some people perceived, I guess, that this was a conflict of interest when it's the planning department that's also making recommendations on development applications. So that was a very interesting comment. There was comments about the size of woodlot that should be considered for protection. Currently, the county's forest management bylaw gets involved when we're talking about 1 hectare of woodlot or greater. And so there were some comments there. There was a number of comments noting woodlots and forests and their key role in mitigating against the impact of climate change, and therefore prioritizing protections in that regard. There were some comments with respect to setting aside no-touch zones, if you will, where no harvesting would be permitted, particularly around sensitive environmental features such as watercourses or wetlands. We heard some comments about whether or not abandoned orchards should be exempt under the bylaw in terms of clearing out old orchards. There were some comments to suggest that specifically any woodlots on agricultural lands should be treated differently than, say, maybe a woodlot in one of our towns or villages or cities in that regard. There was an emphasis on wanting to see replanting or replacement trees, and specifically if we were going to go down that road, having some guidance on the types of trees that should be planted. And specifically, of course, there was an emphasis on wanting to see native species used in that regard. There were some general questions about what it means to have a sustainable harvest and what constitutes a sustainable harvest in that regard. There were some comments to say that the county should not allow circumference cutting and that that's unsustainable in that regard. There were further comments around the protection of private property rights and some questioning whether or not the county even had the legislative authority to pass such a bylaw. And then there were some further comments with respect to a piece of provincial legislation a few years ago referred to as Bill 68, which contained policies that municipalities and counties need to enact policies around preserving the overall tree canopy. And just for the committee's benefit, the county did do this in accordance with that provincial legislation a few years ago. So that's just a very quick smattering of some of the comments we received. In terms of next steps, county staff are now working with our own legal services staff to look at preparing a draft of the bylaw. We're staying in regular communication with our friends at the member municipalities to make sure whatever we're doing is going to align with any municipal plans that they might have. And then we will look to obviously release a draft of the bylaw and get people's feedback on the actual draft. So at this stage, people were more given feedback on the current bylaw or what they would like to see, but it'll be important to get that feedback once we have something for people to read and mull over in that regard. So that's what I have for the committee this morning, but certainly be happy to take any questions if there are any at this stage.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions, comments from the group at this time for Scott?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Lars Weber, Mayor of Town of Blue Mountains. Certainly, I want to thank the county staff for working with our staff on this. Our tree bylaw it's been clear from the beginning. It's meant to not interfere with any agricultural practices. We're more concerned with cutting that happens on development lands prior to people getting any approvals. So, even before there's a grading plan, obviously when there's a grading plan, sometimes in order to, improve the grading to the point where water will run off a piece of property, then, fill has to be put in and the ground, some of it recontoured. And in those instances, obviously trees do have to be cut, but what we are seeing is that in advance of anything, people will move on a piece of development property and clear cut it, just so that, by the time they make their application, there's no tree preservation zone that can be instituted because there are no trees. So really, that was the impetus for the bylaw, and we're still working through that. We're of course, our staff in close consultation with the county because there are a number of overlapping jurisdictions. Obviously, there's the Niagara Escarpment Commission lands, which make up a big part of our town. Then there's the county woodlots, which in anything in greater than a hectare obviously falls under the county. So it's kind of a multi-jurisdictional approach. And so we're still struggling with how we deal with all that. And so that we're able to target, the problems rather than, perhaps be overly broad and capture things that weren't meant to be captured. Clearly, there's a huge problem with ash trees, and at one point it was, an arborist need to be called to assess a tree before you can cut it. But with the large number of ash trees that are dying, I mean, obviously that becomes very prohibitive for owners. I mean, when the ash tree is dying, it's clear to see it's dying, and I don't know that you need an arborist to tell you that. So there are a whole bunch of issues like that are being resolved, and I just wanted to provide that update from as we are working on that in the Blue Mountains. And certainly there's a lot of interest. As Scott will attest, it's become a hot button issue, and we have a very engaged community. So it will take some time to work through all these so that we come up with something that really addresses the problems and isn't overly broad.
All right, thank you, Counselor. Yeah, as far as this committee is concerned, we're primarily, Scott, interested how it'll affect agriculture, of course. I know fence rows are a sensitive issue, but with the changes in farming, you know, we want to make sure that farmers can still access their fields without, you know, causing a lot of issues that way. So we certainly would encourage any of their farm groups, if there is any information they would provide to you, Scott, make sure they submit it in a timely manner, and because looks like we're moving forward on this project, and having all the information in front of you is important. So was there any other questions for Scott at this time? Comments? All right.
Mr. Chair, the delegate is here, Mr. Wilson. So if it's okay with the committee, because we are just a couple of minutes before 9:45, I'll permit him into the meeting and he can begin his presentation, if that's okay.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Just by way of introduction, Mr. Wilson did present at Grey County Council a couple of meetings ago. I'm sorry, I can't even recall now. Council requested that he also present to the Agricultural Advisory Committee. So he is here and on the agenda, and Kathy will pull up the presentation for Mr. Wilson.
Am I okay to go ahead anytime?
You're good to go.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'd like to begin by thanking the committee and the chair, along with warden and council, for allowing me to speak before you all today. My name is Wes Wilson, and before I begin the presentation, I'd just like to take a brief moment to tell you a bit about myself. I've lived in Norfolk County my entire life, and I'm a descendant of the UEL families that founded Norfolk County. And my family has farmed for over 200 years, conserving the original barn that was constructed on our lands for generations. Now, I am actively involved in several professional organizations and committees, including the International Scientific Committees as the representative from Canada of the International Council on Monuments and Sites through the United Nations, organizations such as the Canadian Society for Civil Engineering, Architectural Conservancy of Ontario, ASHRAE, and of course, Ontario Barn Preservation. Currently, I just finished my degree in Architectural Conservation and Sustainability Engineering at Carleton. I am here before you today representing Ontario Barn Preservation, which I'm the District 12 representative, along with the policy and advocacy functions of the organization being part of my portfolio. As part of this, we're making a series of deputations to engage municipal councils and communities across the province to advocate for the change of surplus farm dwelling severance policy to avoid unnecessary demolition of rural agricultural structures. Next slide, please. Ontario Barn Preservation is a not-for-profit started in 2019 to advocate for heritage barns. We do not advocate for mandatory preservation, but encourage voluntary preservation, reuse, and restoration where possible, and provide the resources to those who are interested. You can check out all of our initiatives at ontariobarnpreservation.com. Next slide, please. Is it a lag on my computer, or is the slide not changing?
Kathy, are you having issues with the slides?
No, they seem to be going okay on my end, so I'm not really sure what's happening. Let's try it again. Can you see it?
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you. The provincial policy statement view on heritage barns is that significant built heritage resources and significant cultural heritage landscapes shall be conserved. And we believe that preserving barns is an important part of this goal. Next slide, please. Although our heritage barns may not have the same functionality they once did, we believe that they are an important part of Ontario's cultural history and rural landscape. They provide landmarks in the countryside for rural scenery. They have the potential to be reused and repurposed. They are value-added opportunities for agritourism. The reuse of buildings is more environmentally friendly than use of native new materials. In addition to that, they have historic value for research of vernacular architecture and cultural history. They convey an important sentiment to rural counterparts about the hardworking farm communities. And they are useful for small farm operations as well, contributing to the rural economic growth and development of our regions. Next slide, please. Recently, we became aware that the surplus farm dwelling severance policy was causing the unnecessary demolition of heritage barns. Research was conducted with municipalities, planners, architects, and engineers, with some of the key policies from the provincial policy statement, OMAFRA, zoning regulations, official plans, and Ontario Building Code regulations, which were creating difficulties in the conservation of barns. Next slide, please. Now, the first policy item that we felt was the most detrimental to barns was the minimum distance separation requirements. So we felt that barns retained on the farmhouse lot were the best solution. When done this way, the barn is already in compliance with the minimum distance regulations. Most owners of these small farms see the barn as a novel asset rather than an obsolete liability. These small farm owners are also interested in homing farms, adaptive reuse, preservation, starter farms, CSAs, farm gates, and estate residential. We feel that barns served on the retained farmhouse lot have the greatest success of preservation. Next slide, please. Where a barn is retained on the agricultural lot, being the larger piece, it is in immediate violation of the minimum distance separation requirements, as the related farmhouse is now on a separate lot. Due to the unsuitability of these barns to house animals or equipment effectively, most farm owners would be willing to tear it down from the lack of interest in preservation. Next slide, please. Some of the solutions we found to this problem were retaining the barn on the farmhouse lot with limits on animal capacity or areas. Now, zoning that states that the lot must comply with OMAFRA manure management guidelines and or retaining the barn on the farmer's lot, making it unreasonably capable of housing animals were the best solutions. Next slide, please. The next policy item that we felt was the most detrimental to heritage barns comes from the provincial policy statement, which states that a new lot will be limited to a minimum size needed to accommodate the use and appropriate sewage and water services. This small lot and restrictive guidelines almost always results in the barn being retained on the large agricultural lot. Thus, as explained prior, guarantees its demise. Some solutions we found to this were in municipalities using a minimum and maximum lot size rather than the above stricter guidelines. They were reviewing each severance on a case-by-case basis to determine the best collection of buildings, and they provided language to consider heritage buildings, landscape features, and other site assessments for the severance. Some municipalities also did a reasonable use assessment to ensure that the lot was adequately sized for future septic systems. Next slide, please. The next policy item that we found challenging was the designation of non-farm use. We feel that the non-farm designation of a small residential lot creates a conflict of use in prime agricultural areas, and encourages non-farm residents to purchase these properties that can lead to neighbor conflicts. Where farm uses, including livestock, are permitted on these small lots, and encourages farming owners, building reuse, farm startup, CSAs, and more that contribute to rural revitalization, as well as a better chance for success of heritage barns. Next slide, please. Now, the last policy item that we found challenging was the mandatory change of use of buildings to not permit livestock, where a barn needs to be proven to be used for livestock housing. OMAFRA distinguishes a building capable of housing animals as one with water and stalls. By removing these items from a barn, it can be proven to be an accessory or shed building rather than livestock housing, exempting it from minimum distance separation requirements in the nutrient management plans. Note that the Ontario Building Code actually does not distinguish the difference between an agricultural shed building or an agricultural livestock building. It only distinguishes between an agriculture building, Part 9 building, and a Part 3 large building. Doing a mandatory change of use from agriculture into these other categories as a Part 9 or Part 3 are usually financially challenging and not feasible for most barn owners. We would suggest that wording be clear in zoning bylaws so that it would not be left open to interpretation through different officials, building code, or MAFRA guidelines. Next slide, please. I'd like to leave you with this quote. It is possible that millions now living in North America have never seen a barn, let alone been in one. In the foreseeable future, there is more than a possibility that for many, the kind of barn illustrated in this presentation here today will not be there to be seen. Too often, we see these historic structures in poor condition, with loose boards flapping in the wind, roofs caved in, or just massive timbers decaying in the ground. We realize that not all barns can be saved, but on behalf of Ontario Barn Preservation, we would encourage you to help find ways to prevent the further unnecessary demolition of heritage barns, especially in relation to surplus dwelling severances. It is our hope that barns of significant cultural heritage value are conserved for future generations. I'd like to thank you for your time here today, and if you have any questions on what has been presented, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. That was quite an informative presentation. Any questions from the group at this time for Mr. Wilson?
I see Kathy's hand, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Good morning. I just wanted to say that was a great presentation, and I think if there's anything we can do to support this, it's the culture, the history, just the tourism. It's a no-brainer. We really need to save these buildings.
All right, thank you, Kathy. Go ahead, Brenda.
I just want to echo what Kathy says. I have one of these heritage barns on my property, and it does take a little bit of work to preserve it, but I use it to house all my sheep in winter, hold all of their hay for winter feeding. It is in full use, and to lose it, I partly bought the property because that was one of the first things that I saw that was just an amazing piece. So yeah, I do feel that a lot of times nowadays we want to build new or take down the old to be able to have easier systems, but I think that we lose a lot with that as well. And especially if tourism is something that Grey County wants to stay in the business of, we need to keep these buildings, because these are the ones that people drive around taking pictures of, and people put quilts onto the sides and that sort of thing. So if our landscape becomes all about modern agriculture, we will lose some of the people that want to come up here to see the so-called old-timey days. So anyway, I just wanted to reiterate that you definitely can still use a lot of these barns for animal use. It's not a given that you can't. So thank you very much for that, Leslie.
Thank you.
My question to Mr. Wilson is, what does your group provide to the community, or somebody that has an older barn and definitely doesn't want to destroy it? Is there service you provide as far as?
Yeah, so to answer that question through the chair, what our organization right now is, we're actually in the process of developing is a set of, it's a contractor and trade database where anybody who needs to do restoration on a timber structure or a heritage barn can access the database where contractors can put their information into who specialize in these buildings to access a reputable contractor. In addition to that, our board is mainly architects and engineers across the province. So there's also that expertise that you can tap into as well.
Okay, because sometimes repurposing these buildings can be quite cost prohibitive. Designed and built well over 100 years ago. Christine, I see your hand up. Christine, Councillor Robinson. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everyone. I certainly enjoyed the presentation. I have to say, Wesley was provided a presentation to our local municipality, and we were fortunate to have Diane Booker, who's the president of the Grey Federation of Agriculture, presenting on another topic that same time. So I invited her and members of Grey Federation Agriculture to stay and watch Wesley's presentation. Pardon me. Very well received from our local municipality, and most interesting and well received presentation at Grey County. I'm pleased to hear the comments at our committee level here and the support for this well thought of initiative. I've got a couple things, and that is I was interested to know what Grey County staff have been doing in regards to any initiatives to support these heritage barns, or would this be considered a new initiative should it be embraced by this committee and ultimately county council? Most exciting, whether there is planning policies, tourism initiatives, anything through economic development, etc. And then based on that, perhaps the committee would be interested in endorsing this initiative. Food for thought. Thank you very much.
Scott, you might be able to answer that. I see you have your.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor Robinson, for this question. I'll answer it in two ways. The first is just to give the committee an update on the comments that were made at County Council from my colleague Randy Schertzer. So Randy had committed to council that the county planning staff were going to look into this further in response to Mr. Wilson's presentation. We do have a official plan amendment coming up for a number of other matters. So this is something we were hoping to include into that official plan amendment to look at what policy approaches there are available, and certainly we'll look to other municipal approaches in that regard, and talk to people like Mr. Wilson as well as our colleagues at OMAFRA who are instructive in this regard. With respect to what we're doing currently, there really is, in my mind, two scenarios. One is, it sounds like maybe more what Brenda was speaking to, whereby there is one of these older barns and it remains on a farm and is being used for farm purposes. I think in her case, she mentioned that sheep and hay storage. And certainly there's nothing at the county that would stand in the way of anyone continuing to use that barn for farm purposes. Certainly encourage that. With respect to somebody looking to reuse these barns, whether they be on a current farm lot or on a severed surplus farm dwelling lot, there's a few considerations that we look at there. One of the ones, and I think our chair kind of alluded to it, is in some cases the cost to retrofit. One of the most popular proposals that we see is someone looking to buy a property and turn one of these old barns into what we call a wedding barn. So they want it as an event venue to host weddings. And it it is an interesting alternative, and it's my guess is it would be a very nice place to hold a wedding. But the challenge comes with the building code at that stage, because a barn that was built 100 years ago isn't built to the same standards that we would need to build an event venue today to hold 75 or 100 people. So while we do get a number of inquiries on these, unfortunately, quite often when people start looking at the dollars and cents needed to bring that barn into modern building code standards for an assembly venue, it can be cost prohibitive. Though we have had other unique proposals for some of these heritage barns, and we're supportive certainly with our friends, and Brian's on the call today in tourism, to look at what we can do there to reuse these properties and also attract tourism in that regard. And so we've had people that have tried to convert the barns for educational purposes. In some cases, you could come and visit the farm and learn more about farming, maybe participate in a workshop in the old barn. So we see that as a great reuse in that regard. Those are just a few of the examples. But certainly we're happy to explore this issue further at the direction of the committee and council, and work with groups like Mr. Wilson's to look at the options in that regard.
All right, thanks, Scott. Kathy, you wanted the comment?
Hi, I just wanted to add that I understand that the building code is an issue, but if there could be some sort of open-mindedness, because most of these buildings are built far beyond the capabilities of newer buildings. And also the fire bylaws, I understand, have always been a problem when you're looking at using these buildings for other uses. So the other thing that I wanted to mention was the comment made about removing the water from the barn. And a lot of people, that's just not even, a lot of detached garages now, people want washroom facilities and water. So that would be another prohibitive thing to ask people to say, well, if you're going to keep this barn, there can't be any water to it. So just comments. Thanks a lot.
Lori, I see you have your hand up as well.
Yes, thank you. Again, like everyone's saying, excellent presentation. I too love those old barns. We lost a lovely bank barn, which was in excellent condition in a tornado in '96. And so I value the barns. And then we lost another one on another farm in a windstorm. So they are definitely, we're losing them. So we need to maintain them as much as possible. I do appreciate, though, that in the presentation, it says they advocate for not for mandatory preservation, but encourage them. They were built in a different era and a different time for different requirements. They were built in a time where everyone had livestock, everyone needed a place to put their hay. That's not the situation on all farms now. And so many farms do not have livestock, and without livestock in those barns deteriorate even quicker. And so I do want to emphasize that it has to be an encouragement as opposed to a mandatory position. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments at this time? Warden Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Wesley for his presentation once again. It's very interesting indeed. I am persuaded by the very first slide, which talks about prevention of unnecessary demolition. That language, I think, is important because, the mandatory nature, but I like the language, prevent unnecessary demolition. So it's not necessary. Why are we demolishing it? And I think one of the best arguments is the landscape beautification, if we can call it that, because they are beautiful. I mean, you drive along and you see these things, and you do see people pull over sometimes, and they want to get a picture because it's so gorgeous. While we're talking about that, I haven't been in farming for ages now, but in my day, you had what we call them square bales, but they weren't exactly square, they were maybe a rectangle, and you stacked them, and it was a lot of work. I remember my blistering hands. But now we have round bales, and particularly we have the bales that you see wrapped in plastic. I've never been involved with that or used it. What is the latest wisdom on that? Because if we're talking about beautification, it's not very pretty to see these long rows of baled hay laying in a field. And are people not using barns for storage of hay anymore? I mean, what's the latest wisdom there?
Would like to answer that. I could probably, provide some of the explanation. You definitely been away from the farm maybe a little too long. It is fairly labor intensive moving all these square bales, and labor is the key ingredient there. So we spent a lot of time putting square bales away for free, since it was part of the family obligation, whereas with the lack of labor and improvements of equipment, things need to speed up, and that's why you'll see a lot of round bales outside to protect them from the weather. They often cover them, to help prevent rot and spoilage, and just increase the entire productivity of the farm. As it was mentioned, as the hay gets removed from these buildings along with the livestock, like we've seen barns that as soon as the animals disappear and the weight of the hay that's on top, it only takes a couple of years for the moisture move in, and with frost and heaving and whatnot, these buildings fall apart in a hurry. And with the improvements or the changes made on how livestock is farmed and kept on the farm, I think there's a bit of a time emergency with some of these barns. Mr. Wilson, if you can maybe comment on that, as far as they will be disappearing at a faster rate as hay and livestock is removed from these buildings.
Yeah, so there are some components and that I'd like to touch on as well, in addition to what you were just alluding on there, Mr. Chair, in terms of the agriculture versus livestock components. When you remove livestock from a barn, it presents additional challenges, and that's where these initiatives come into play. And this is partly the reason why our organization is taking on this matter, because when livestock and hay are removed from a building, it alters the moisture characterization within the structure, and it causes deterioration typically within the masonry of the building in the foundation level, resulting in the foundation having to have extensive repairs. However, the caveat to all of this is when you have somebody who's educated on barn restoration or restoration, rehabilitation, or just working with older buildings in general, this can be accomplished in an effective way. But it takes the right expertise for someone to know what they're doing. And that's an area that is growing within the province quite exponentially. So there are methods and ways to get it done. We just have to get to that stage in the open-mindedness in allowing this conversion to happen. And like Mr. Chair was saying, the change in the agricultural evolution of Ontario from a smaller livestock operation to larger livestock operations, which is also why we've undertaken this initiative, is to get rid of the small timber barn and build this megalithic steel structure to accommodate the livestock and the agricultural expansion that the farm is undergoing, which is also a reason for this initiative that we've undertaken. And just to touch on a couple of other points while I have the opportunity, in terms of the building code regulations, we're actually working on a project with Perth County to educate building officials in timber structures and in barns, because as it was expressed by one of the committee members, that these buildings are constructed at a structural capacity way beyond what current structures are. And most officials and most building engineers today don't understand this. and they just say, well, get rid of it. It's old. It doesn't work. But what people don't realize and understand is that a timber building built 200 years ago can withstand far beyond what any building constructed today could, because of the old growth timber. And as in terms of the fire regulations, this is another point that we're trying to work with building officials on, because old growth timber is actually more fire efficient than new growth timber, because the way the timber is in the pores and in the structure, an old growth timber lasts longer in a fire than a new growth. And most new timber buildings burn quicker than a barn, because there's a sacrificial layer around the timber beam called the char layer, which prevents that expansion of the fire into the actual structure. Sorry to get too technical.
Kim, you have your hand up.
Unmute myself. My only point was back to the earlier.
Sorry. Still can't.
Okay.
Hear.
I was just going back to an earlier comment about hay storage in the barn. It was my own experience that the insurance companies frown mightily on that. And certainly anybody with horses or anything like that, it's just not best practice at this time. So just to add that in, thanks.
Thank you. Brenda.
Well, I was going to say that we don't use square bales anymore. We definitely use the round bales. We stack them 3 bales high. We do fit a whole winter's worth for about 60 to 100 sheep in there. I was just wanting to say that I should probably also disclose that I am quite attached to one of the founders of the Ontario Barn Preservation, John Radojkovic. And, you know, he has helped me to make sure that my barn stays up, and it has not been hugely cost prohibitive as a result. But I have to echo what Kathy says. They're built to last. When we had to put up a new structure on top of an old barn foundation, because the other one had blown down before I bought the property, we had to, you know, to get the permits through the county, we did have to get an engineer in to do stuff with the foundation and everything. And it was kind of astounding to think that they would be considered any less, this 2-foot thick fieldstone walls would be considered any less strong than some sort of poured concrete thing. Anyway, sorry, my daughter's going to join us for a minute. Anyway, I guess what I was saying is it's not that these barns cannot hold hay or they cannot use current modern round bales or any of those things. They do perhaps require, they do require upkeep. Like you need your ramps to work, you need your, the threshing floor or whatever you want to call it. The section that holds the hay does need to have that double floor, which is usually like 2 layers of like hemlock. And I don't know if any of you guys know what cured hemlock is like, but you can't even nail through that. You have to drill a hole to put your nail through it. So, you know, I think that, yes, it would be wonderful if there could be a lot more education towards building inspectors and building codes as to, I guess, the nature of timber framing as a very strong structural building, as well as the fact that it can still be used for, especially, I guess, more the sort of small scale CSA livestock farming, maybe not for like 1,000 head of cattle per se, but it's not, they definitely can have a lot of livestock. Sorry, my daughter is being rather distracting here. Anyway, that's all. I just want to mention that it's not just for small square bales. We can still use the modern large silage wrapped large bales as well.
Thank you, Brenda. Councillor Robinson.
Great, thank you. Just a couple comments, and perhaps I'll place a motion. But I do want to say that I respect Warden Hicks and his question, because that's what it's all about on this committee, is education and learning more, and by way of getting an update on hay storage. So I think it really speaks to what we're doing here on this committee. What I was wondering, I was most intrigued with this presentation and the whole philosophy of barn preservations, because that is the fact. Once they're gone, they're gone, and they are wonderful structures on our environment. I was wondering if this motion is of interest to the committee, so I would move at this time that the Grey County Agriculture Advisory Committee endorses the mandate of the Ontario Barn Preservation, which, and I'm capturing the mandate from the first two slides, which advocates for change to the surplus form dwelling severance policy to avoid unnecessary demolition, and that the Ontario Barn Preservation does not advocate for the mandatory preservation, but encourages voluntary preservation, reuse, and restoration where possible, and provide resources to support those. And that as the staff provide reports to Grey County Council, that this committee be provided the opportunity to report back, provide comment, engagement, and have an opportunity to provide Grey County Council with recommendations. Thank you.
Do we need to have a seconder or discussion first towards the motion?
So you do need to have a seconder, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, can we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Soever, you were first, so you get to be the seconder. Okay. Do we want to have a vote right now? And
Mr. Chair, if there are others that wish to discuss the motion, that would be most appropriate now,
yeah,
before the vote's taken.
Okay. Discussion on the motion.
I do see Kathy's hand, Shirley, and, sorry, Councillor Keaveney and Warden Hicks.
All right. Let's start with Warden Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do support the flavor of the motion. And I just want to clarify, perhaps with Councillor Robinson, is the intention of this motion to, first of all, say that we support the overall objective of the Ontario Barn Association of preserving and preventing unnecessary demolition of barns. I'm in complete support of that. And I'm wondering, is your motion intended to turn it back to staff so that staff can work with these people and come back with some recommendations to this committee, which this committee can then perhaps recommend or endorse and recommend to council? Is that the intention of the motion?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Warden Hicks, that is precisely what I'm looking for. But I struggled with the language because I know that this committee cannot direct staff. And I just wanted to ensure that that as the staff reports are being addressed, as Planner Taylor had mentioned, that there was additional work that was going to be done. And that was suggested and directed through County Council, that as those reports are generated, that they be shared with this committee, and then it would give this committee an opportunity to comment and provide feedback to overall Grey County Council. So however, if that language in the motion needs to be amended to reflect that, that is precisely as your understanding is the intent of my motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only thing is, I was listening to, there was a lot of verbiage in there. Maybe I didn't pick up on all of it, but I would not want to tie the hands of staff and sort of say, you should do exactly what the Ontario Barn Preservation is suggesting. I think what we want to say is we love what the idea of what they're presenting, and would encourage staff to work with them and come up with a Grey County solution. I don't think that's what you're suggesting, Councillor Robinson, but I just wanted to make sure that we weren't entirely adopting exactly what we see in the Ontario Barn Association presentation, but just the flavor of it.
So, Mr. Chair, through you, the intent is to support the mandate, and that we look forward to the additional reports that are coming forward through staff, and that we would have an opportunity through our mandate here as Grey County Agriculture Advisory Committee, as an advisory committee to council, to provide comment on those reports, and also to educate our committee as well. So that is the intent of it. You're completely understanding the intent of the motion as we presented it. Thank you.
So do we need to reword this motion and simplify it somewhat, or go ahead, Heather?
Mr. Chair, if I may, and I will hear the other comments, but I think staff have heard from committee members, Councillor Robinson's motion, seconded by Councillor Soever, and then Warden Hicks' comments and clarification on that. If Councillor Robinson could provide me with that motion following the meeting and with the committee's support, we will work with the motion to make sure that it meets the intent of what the committee is looking for.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
other comments? We had a few more. Kathy, Kathy, you first. Go ahead.
Thanks, John, Mr. Chair. I just want to say it's obvious that there's an emotional attachment to these buildings. And if you haven't been in agriculture, sometimes people don't understand how deep that emotional attachment is. Having said that, there's also emotional attachment to historic churches and all kinds of other historic buildings. So I would like to see them as important as these other structures that are protected. And to the building code aspect of it, I understand that log homes don't fall into our typical building code, but having talked to building officials in the past, that somebody that understands the structure of a log home, obviously very similar to a structure of a timber frame barn, that, you know, it can be made work if the understanding's there. And that just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kivany.
Very much, Chair, and just wanted to add that I appreciate and support Councillor Robinson's motion. And I just had a question for clarification. Do we automatically assume that if there's a silo attached to the barn, that is included in what we're addressing here today?
We had a little issue with your sound. Did everybody get the question? No, could you please repeat that? Sorry.
Oh, I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just again express my appreciation and support for Councillor Robinson's motion. And my question for clarification was, do we automatically assume that if there is a silo attached to a barn that we're hoping to encourage to be preserved, that is included in the motion and in what we're adopting here today?
Councillor Robinson, would you like to comment on that?
So the silo attached to the barn, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that.
Well,
I thought we were looking at the barns, but that is a question that I think needs discussion from somebody other than me. Thank you.
Mr.
Good question.
Wilson, yeah, just gonna hand this over to you. I would assume, like, I've been in enough of these old barns to realize that every barn is different and comes with their own issues and whatnot. And there's different outbuildings that might be in different states of repair. So my question to you is, you would look at each building or unit as its own unique unit and go from there, I would assume.
Typically, so my background is in conservation of historic structures. And when we're looking at any building, we look at it as a unit on a case-by-case basis. And it's a case-by-case evaluation process that we undertake when looking at buildings. In most instances, and well, not anymore, silos are attached to a barn. So it's really is a case by case basis, as Chair expressed.
Thank you. Were there any more questions or comments, Councillor Soever?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so with regard to the silos, I think there's an excellent opportunity there to repurpose them for cell towers. And as we become more connected, rural internet as well, perhaps that could even be a source of funding from the service providers to refurb the silos and repurpose them without putting a bunch of towers on our landscape as a blight on our landscape. I'd rather see the silo there maintained by the internet company rather than a new tower right next to it.
Any other comments, questions? RJ?
I apologize if we did address this. I just had a phone call. I had to step out for a couple of minutes. But before I say that, let me say that I built a new sort of pole barn in 1994 in Chatsworth, and the snow just collapsed the whole thing last year. Meanwhile, all of those nice timber barns were standing strong and probably will for another several hundred years. So I can definitely attest to that. Sorry if you addressed this, but do we have any data on how many barns are disassembled or not maintained because of properties that have moved from agricultural to like hobby farm or just like a recreational property, typically from someone who didn't necessarily live here before but bought one of these properties with these barns on it? Do we have any data on how big a slice of the disappearing barn issue lays with non-farmers? Because I think a lot of what we're talking about today is about policies for farmers, but what about the other side?
So through the chair, this is a difficult question to answer because the caveat to this is under the Ontario Building Code, a farm building or an agriculture building does not require a demolition permit. So we don't know the vast scale of this. We know just from qualitative data rather than quantitative data that yes, this is occurring just through tracking of severances that are being undertaken. Typically, when a lot is purchased by somebody who is looking at the farm or, well, the farm really, for non-agricultural purposes, the barn is retained in most instances from what we have seen from the data side on severances, because there are quite a few severance properties that we track to see, okay, what's happening as soon as the severance starts to when it ends and the trail in between to get an understanding. So it really is a mix, to be quite honest, of farmers doing a demolition versus somebody getting told to do a demolition by the municipality, because you'd be surprised at how often that actually happens. The municipality tells the farmer, you need to demolish the barn. Or in other instances, somebody comes in who doesn't want the barn on the property for some reason and demolishes it. It's really is a thirds mix between the three. So it gets to be a difficult question to answer, is who exactly is doing it because of how much of a mixed bag it is.
All right, thank you. Were there any other comments? Heather, we still need to vote on the motion, correct?
You do, sir. I don't see any more comments or questions,
Yeah.
Committee.
So can we have an all in favor for this motion? Did we get a count?
That motion is carried, sir.
Carried. All right, motion carried. Thank you, everybody. Mr. Wilson, I think we're done. Thank you for your presentation. I hope you came to the meeting with what you're hoping to get out of it. So we'll look forward to hearing from you and forward on your endeavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Greatly appreciated. And I'd like to thank the committee for their endorsement.
Take care. All right, next on the agenda, Climate Action Plan update.
Great, thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess this is me again. I apologize. I will be speaking a fair amount in this meeting, but hopefully it's useful information. So as the committee is aware, we are working on a climate action plan. We've had 2 recent reports that went to the Climate Change Task Force on this, which were attached to the agenda. And I'll just give you a very quick Coles notes as well as some next steps. The first report was dealing with the desire from staff to hire a climate change coordinator, even ahead of the finalization of the Climate Change Action Plan. We view this position as a support not only to our county operations, but also a key support to our member municipalities and to our communities, to the communities across Grey in this regard. And so this would be a person that would be tasked with working with staff and council to finalize the climate action plan, but then even more importantly, working across the community to look at implementation. And one of the key sectors we've noted throughout this whole process is the need to work with the agricultural sector on actions moving forward. And certainly I know there's a number around this table that will be interested in some of the recommendations in that regard. And so the task force and ultimately county council did support moving forward with a climate change coordinator for a 2-year contract. At the end of that 2 years, we would reassess to determine whether or not it needs to be a longer term thing or what the status is at that stage. And I can tell you that we have posted for this position and actually just completed some interviews. So we're looking at our options amongst the candidates that interviewed and applied, and we hope to have some shortly on this. The second report that was attached to this agenda had to do with a group that involves multiple counties between here and Wellington and areas surrounding us, looking at the need to assess the region's ability to support electric vehicles. So if one of the recommendations coming out of the Climate Change Network or the Climate Change Action Plan is going to be that we need to better support electric vehicles, then do we have enough charging stations and infrastructure in place to deal with that? So through this group, the County of Wellington is going to be applying for a Federation of Canadian Municipalities grant to look at assessing what's there currently across this broad region, and also what would be needed to upgrade the infrastructure in this regard so that we know we have those supports in place. So what the group had asked the county for was a $5,000 contribution to this study, in addition to support for applying for this funding. So again, the task force and council was very supportive in that regard. And so at this stage, we're just waiting to hear back from the partners on whether or not they were successful in securing the grant in that regard. My understanding is that decision is to come in early August. So hopefully we'll hear back within the next few months. And the final update, which wasn't attached to the agenda, is simply to note that we've scheduled the next Climate Change Task Force meeting for July the 5th. At this task force meeting, we are looking to present the draft Climate Change Action Plan. At this stage, that draft plan has been reviewed by county staff, and it's been shared with our municipal staff across our 9 member municipalities. And we've gotten some excellent feedback from some of our municipalities so far, but we really want to bring this draft plan into the public sphere. And so if the task force supports moving forward, we would look to release the draft Climate Change Action Plan in a more public fashion, and then we would spend our summer going out and getting feedback on the draft plan. And so certainly bringing it back to this group would be very important, but also looking at broader sectors across the county, whether they be residents, or businesses or other sectors. So we hope to have further news to share on that shortly, and we look forward to certainly the input from the community and also the input from the task force on July 5th. So that's the update I have at this stage, but certainly be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Any questions for Scott? Don't see any. Thank you, Scott. Our next item on the agenda, the H-Friendly Community.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I do see
Sorry.
with her hand up, and Councillor
Christine.
Robinson.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Councillor Robinson. Could you turn on your?
Robinson.
Thanks. I thought I was unmuted. Thank you. I just wanted to thank Scott Taylor, our planner, for a great presentation and update, and remind this committee that we did have the presentation from HIBA on the agricultural lens that the county was focusing on, and the surveys that went out for feedback. So that's a good reference point to go back on that slide deck to refresh our memories on that information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, there was another hand up.
Kathy?
Kathy, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is there a, what's the word? Monetary, like, do people pay for charging their cars? Like, is there income from these? Like, just like when you go to the gas station, you got to pay for the gas.
Go ahead, Scott.
So through you, Mr. Chair, very good question. Thanks, Kathy, for that. There's a variety of models out there, and on the one hand, we want to consider the charging facilities that might be available at public locations, and as well making sure that people's homes are equipped with those. So obviously, if you have it at your home, you're not necessarily paying other than your electrical bill. With respect to the public stations, there are a variety of models. In some cases, it is a paid system. In other cases, it might be a group or business that is sponsoring in that regard. So they're paying the bill. Most recently, we were discussing with a proponent that was looking at having a facility on public lands, and their model was that they would charge for the charge, I guess, if you will, charge for charging your vehicle, and that in exchange for being able to site these facilities on public lands, they would then be donating a portion of the proceeds back to charity. And in speaking with this group, just because I wasn't overly familiar with this process, they estimated a charge takes approximately 2 hours in length. So ideally, you'd want it at a place where people are already parking for some time. And so, some members of the committee might have seen some of these stations at hotels in the past, whereby maybe you're parking overnight, and so you can get a charge. In Owen Sound here and in other communities, we have the Tesla charging stations at our Walmart. And so presumably the assumption is you're going in to shop for a while, so you can get your charge there. But we would be looking at hopefully a mixture of opportunities in this regard, from the completely private network, similar to an Esso station or a gas station in that regard, to what are the opportunities to offer charging on our public lands, whether they be county lands or municipal lands or other such lands in that regard.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Any more comments, questions? Don't see any. All right. Okay, moving to our next item. H-Friendly Community Plan. Scott, you're up once more.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have some good news to share with the committee here today. The county was successful in getting some what's called an Inclusive Community Grant Program Fund to undertake a age-friendly community strategy. And for those that might not be familiar with an age-friendly community strategy, I'll just give you some quick Coles notes in that regard. When we talk about planning across our communities, we often refer to a term called 880 cities or 880 communities. And essentially what that means is if we can plan our communities and design our communities such that they're good for an 8-year-old, as well as being good for an 80-year-old, quite often they'll be good for large numbers of demographics in between. And sometimes even if we think about the challenges between our very young and our very seasoned, they can be very similar. So the struggle that a parent might have pushing a stroller down a sidewalk or navigating public buildings or stores in a stroller might be very similar to someone that's using a wheelchair or assisted device in their more years. So we would really like to explore across the county actions that can be taken to improve our communities for both our youth and our seniors. And the World Health Organization has actually defined 8 characteristics that we need to look into in that regard, which would form the backbone of the study. And just for the committee's benefit, they include community and healthcare as the first one, transportation as the second one. And as we can imagine, again, those challenges for young people and seniors, again, can be very similar at the transportation level, where they might be either too young or maybe aged out of having their own private vehicle in that regard. One of the other 8 domains is housing. The next one is social participation. We're also looking at outdoor spaces and buildings. We're looking at respect and social inclusion. We're looking at civic participation and employment. And then we're looking at communication and information in that regard. And so we'd like to look at each of these domains and look at what they mean for people living across Grey. And this plan will be very different than, say, if the City of Toronto was undertaking such a plan, because we do have such vast differences in our communities, and we really need to consider our rural and agricultural areas as well, both from an employment perspective, but also from a housing and transportation perspective. So what does it mean to age if you're living in the countryside, maybe kilometers away from the nearest city, town, or village? What does it mean for transportation in that regard? And we do have different options at this point with our Grey Transit route and of course, cycling, walking, and private automobiles. And what does it mean for our outdoor spaces? And we know that we have a large portion of our population, which is nearing their senior years in this regard, in terms of the baby boom is working their way through the system. And so what's this going to look like in our buildings and spaces as we see greater portions of the population needing, say, mobility devices? But similarly, what do we need to do across the county to make sure that our youth see Grey County as a viable location to not only grow up, but hopefully to live and work and start businesses and everything else. So this is really just the kickoff of this initiative. We are going to be various different groups across our communities, and we would certainly love to hear from the agricultural sector in this regard. And so there will be consultations going on throughout the summer. We will be obviously discussing significantly with our member municipalities, and I should give a shout out here to the town of Hanover, who has been working on their own age-friendly initiatives for a number of years here. And so we will be drawing from the leadership that they've already provided in that regard. That's, again, just a very quick outline of what we're looking at in this regard, but I'd love to take any questions if there are any at this stage. And certainly hopefully bring updates back to this group and get feedback from this group on this important initiative.
All right, thank you, Scott. Any questions for Scott on this particular topic? One question there, Scott, how would you see the agricultural side tie in with this project?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. It's a great question. I see it in a few different ways. One of the things that we've heard about anecdotally over the years, and even had some quantitative evidence, is the average age of farmers across Ontario and across Grey County. And so if we're looking at an average age, and I don't have the number in front of me, but I've heard numbers from 55 plus in some cases is the average age. What does that next generation of farming look like? Who's coming up behind some of our current farmers to fill that important need in our community? Another aspect will be again tied with the aging piece of farming. If somebody finally retires from the farm and decides to move on to that next stage of life, what do their housing options look like in that regard? And we've heard from a number of farmers in the past, and I've family members that have said this too. The only way I'm leaving my farm is in a cedar box kind of thing. And there isn't a lot of desire to move into a town or a village or a city. So what is that? What do those golden years look like for this community, and what do we need for supports there? One of the other things that we've been actively looking at over the county in the past number of years, and this deals with the other end of the age spectrum, is what are the supports and the barriers to youth getting involved in farming. And it's a great tie-in to one of the topics later in our agenda about the skills program in agriculture. What do we need to be doing to support those future farmers? So those are, again, very, very high level thoughts in this regard. But those are some of the considerations that I flagged, but I'm sure with the expertise across this table, there's many other considerations that we as county staff simply haven't even thought of yet.
All right, excellent. Any other questions regarding this topic from the group? Suggestions? Go ahead, Warden Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with this age-friendly strategy, there are two phases that we heard about at County Council. One was in the first phase, which I understand is from May to September. It will be sort of the visioning exercise. And I think there could be a really important tie from the agricultural community in terms of influencing the visioning of the age-friendly strategy. So that would, sort of allow the group to, in its strategy, make sure that at a very early stage, the agricultural lens is well represented. So that when we move into phase 2, which would be more of the action plan, the action plan would be taking your priorities and focusing on sort of your low-hanging fruit, looking at implementation strategies. And that will happen from October 2021 to January 2022. Sort of that stage, the sort of action plan stage will be well influenced. So I do think there's a terrific opportunity here for the agricultural community to have input into this process. Keeping in mind that we heard from the group that if the current trend continues, the 65 plus age group will be the largest population group in Grey County in the not so distant future. Keeping that in mind, we want to make sure that this strategy is not just going to focus on the older folks, which is important. They need focus, but we also need to focus on that younger group because we still need a workforce. We need people who are younger, who are of baby making age. We heard that from one of the experts a few years ago. And what do we need to do to make sure that they are in that the climate or the ground is fertile for them to be here in Grey County.
All right, thank you, Warden. RJ?
As a farmer who has a more elderly parents, specifically father that lives in the household but is mostly retired, I did just want to add a little bit of a comment. I really think that Grey County has an opportunity here to be actually pretty innovative. So it's what we've learned during COVID is that we can meet all the physical demands or physical needs of an aging population in terms of like getting their groceries and making sure that there's food and support for them. And But what I really think is that there's an opportunity here and a major gap, which is about sort of mental health and community building. So I just wanted to encourage all of us to be, we could really be leaders in that regard. I know that, you know, in Saskatchewan, they're piloting doing daycares and early childhood education in old folks' homes. Perhaps that could happen again when the world opens up a little bit more. I also know that there are a lot of community groups like the Lions Club and the Rotary and the Optimist. I've been presenting at a few of them on forums like this on Zoom. There are a lot of opportunities out there where we can be sort of mixing the generations and creating opportunities for collaborations there. I would say too that when we're looking specifically at the agriculture community, it's sometimes difficult to make the immediate jump into a multi-generational home. And so I don't necessarily know what the solution is there, but I think sometimes, and I know on our farms, not being able to even park like a temporary permanent home, like a mobile home, as a sort of bridge does handicap us. And so when you're looking at sort of transitioning the farm, sometimes we think of that hard sale, property sale, but there's a couple of years in there where there's, I think, the opportunity for a sort of soft transition. If you're giving your farm to family, yeah, you guys can probably jump in the same home, but if you're exploring like a relationship with, say, like an immigrant family or someone moving from elsewhere, or having the opportunity to have temporary housing for them on the farm, in terms of support, it is fantastic. But I do want to say that I'm really excited at every opportunity that I get to interact with the more aging population around here, because they may not have the physical capabilities, but they for sure have all of the knowledge that I think really makes my life as a young person so much easier, because chances are they've screwed up the same thing I'm trying to do probably 10 times before they learn the lesson. So that's all. Thank you for an opportunity to speak there.
Thank you, RJ. Lori, go ahead.
Further to RJ's point, yes, it's imperative that we determine how to have granny flats, or whatever we want to call them, an easy process to build those, so that's where our elders can live. It would kill some of them to leave the farm. That this has been their way of life for all of their life, and so they stay healthier when they're on the farm and contributing in some manner. So if we can make the building process to build a small granny flat for them on our farm properties, that's ideal. I think it's happening in some municipalities, but I think there's a lot of barriers, a lot of difficulty to do that. So if we can smooth the waters and make it easier for those granny flats to be built, that would be great. Further to Warden Hicks' comment, I think it's important to get the ag community's comments in this visioning portion, but like it always happens, you're doing your visioning exercises in May to September, when all of our farmers have their boots in the ground and they're not available for comment. So when you ask them for comment and you're not getting anything, it's not because they don't care, it's because they have no time. So just recognize, everyone needs to recognize when they're asking for input from the farm community, it's very difficult to get it when they are so busy. And usually the winter is when they have a little more time on their hands, but I know that doesn't always fit into your timing. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Brenda.
Thank you, RJ, for bringing up this whole the generational shift, and Scott for mentioning about having to bring, you know, a new generation of farmers in, and Warden Hicks about having a fertile soil for the next generations to come into Grey County as well. These are all, I just have to say yes up to all of that. And what Lori was saying about granny flats, or what RJ was saying about allowing mobile homes and all that sort of thing, this whole idea of being able to have farmers age in place on their farms, whether that mean modifying their homes, moving them to another place on their farms, and then also allowing space for the next succeeding generation to come in, whoever that may be. I think that that's where we do need to start being really creative, because it isn't always going to be family, and it isn't always going to be someone who is going to inherit the farm. So we also need to consider, what are different potential leasing arrangements or, rent to own and all that sort of thing. So I think that in the long term, if Grey County could start, brainstorming on these ideas now, we could quite be at the forefront of trying to figure out how to bring that next generation into farming. But I do think that the aging in place thing is very important, whether that be a separate granny flat, modification, like existing farmhouses with the staircases. I still have to hold my 4-year-old's hand to come up and down our stairs. And we have started to make modifications on our home to have bathroom facilities all on one floor for when my mother eventually has to move in with us. So I completely understand all these things. And I think if Grey County were to look at, joining some of the federal or provincial programs to do with renovations to existing places, even to be able to fit more people and age them in place. I say this also to come back to the whole, let's not get rid of existing buildings. If we can just take, like, a lot of these farmhouses are huge, right? Like some of our places are quite large. I think if there could be a lot more creativity in figuring out how to make that work for an aging population without having to necessarily add in more septics and new buildings, that would be great as well. So again, just a multitude of different solutions to some of these problems would be really great.
All right, thank you, Brenda. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As I said at County Council, this is the most exciting time where we'll be able to get a lot of input on this plan and strategy, which will really pay attention to our Grey County residents. A couple of things. I was wondering what the next steps would be for this advisory committee to be engaged and provide, as we are doing today, meaningful dialogue and ideas that can contribute to this strategy. So will there be a workshop, a survey, putting this item back on our next agenda so that we've got a bit more time to think about what we want to say? So, or is this our opportunity right here and just following the rest of the processes outlined in the report? I also wanted to say, so that's a question, that when we're looking at senior farmers who have been supporting agriculture all their life, and now maybe in a position where they're looking for individuals that can work along with them to learn all about farming, but also provide the valuable help that they require in their daily work, whether it's assisting with the fence line that there's a weak spot in it and you want to prevent the cows from meandering and walking on a road, or just learning how to plant crops from start to finish, that whole process. So there would be individuals out there that perhaps there's individuals that would like to enter into learning about agriculture and taking this on as not only a lifestyle, but working and producing crops for our community and Ontario in general. So what is the connect that we can provide those individuals that want to work in farming in this agricultural sector and connecting them with farmers that are needing the assistance? Thank you.
Scott, could you answer question 1? What are you looking for at this time?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I think to get to Councillor Robinson's question, so certainly this isn't the only opportunity for input. This is a relatively new project, and it's actually my colleague, Stephanie Lacey-Avon, that's been leading this one on behalf of county staff, and she's been working very closely with the consultant. And they're just looking at now how to set up those community visioning sessions and next steps. So what I might suggest, if the committee is amenable to it, is for the next few meetings, we leave this on as a standing item, and we give not only an update at the meetings, but we leave space for the committee to feedback. And certainly if there are any sessions that aren't unique to this committee, we could also endeavor to send out the invites to people on this committee, whether they're interested in attending or sharing with their own networks. And just to address Lori's comments, and Lori has made these comments to me a number of times about why are you scheduling sessions during the summer and the fall and the spring? Why are you doing this? And she's always done it in a very polite way. In this case, we got this funding, and once we got this funding, there was a very short turnaround time for when we needed to complete the project and when we needed to spend X percentage of the monies that were given to us. So I don't want to use that as a cop. We've certainly heard those comments in the past. But the best we can offer at this stage is that we're going to try to make it in that first phase as flexible as possible in the ways to give feedback, whether it be through online surveys or other such things. And we've had to do that because of COVID anyway, because we can't all gather in large spaces. But I wanted to assure this committee and Lori that those comments haven't gone unheard, and we will try to work with the agricultural community to look at ways that meet farmers' very busy schedules. And certainly any feedback from anyone around this table would be greatly appreciated. And the nice part about meeting in this format is we're recording all of our meetings. So after this meeting, I'm going to be talking with Stephanie and saying, hey, you really should watch this meeting because there was a lot of good ideas. Certainly, I love some of the comments about granny flax and allowing people to age in place. So we'll take the feedback heard, and we're certainly open to additional feedback for sure.
Excellent, Scott. Councillor Kivany.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really appreciate this conversation. I have a brother who was born in his farmhouse, and he's going to be carried out in that cedar box. So the aging in place is critically important. I know Philly has her hand up, and perhaps you were planning to speak to this, Philly, but I wanted to ask you about the matching process that I know you've been engaged in, and I know you've been working with land, but I'm also wanted to ask you if that also included barns in that particular project. And I also wanted to remind us of this perfect opportunity to acknowledge the program at Grey Roots, the educational opportunity there. And I know we're trying to get that back up and running, and how important that is for our youth to be able to engage in that education through that program to take back to the farms. So Philly, I know you'll answer what I posed there.
All right, thank you. Philly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, Councillor Kivany, that's exactly what I was going to speak to. And wow, is this an opportune time to join this meeting? And thank you for your patience for my late arrival. I am, in fact, currently working on healthcare for aging parents who have recently moved from their rural property. And that's why I was late joining the meeting. So this is all very close to my heart right now. And yes, we did 2 years ago in February, partnered with the regional job fair, offer a networking opportunity for landowners and land seekers. We partnered with the organization FarmLink, and they work to get young people into farm mentorship opportunities on existing farms with the hope that eventually there will be succession. Of course, that is dependent on finances, which, as we know, are a huge barrier for many young people trying to get into farming. It was an excellent trial balloon. Ultimately, we did not make any partnerships, and we would have been very happy to continue with that this year. But of course, we know what happened with COVID. It's still on my work plan, and what I would like to see the county do moving forward when we do another networking opportunity like this for land sharing, for mentoring, and for succession is to involve other organizations that are working with youth and young farmers and widen our catchment area. FarmLink works with a very specific segment of farmers. And while they are a great match for some of the existing farms here in Gray, they're not reaching everybody. The Tri-County group, including Bruce County and Simcoe County, that worked on our agricultural BRE, our Business Retention and Expansion Plan project a couple of years ago, has entered into a relationship with FarmLink, but we are reconsidering that. We're looking at how to widen it out and potentially do networking on a regional basis, whether that means meetings across various areas. But it is definitely on all our minds here at the county and in fact across the region.
All right, thank you, Philly. Kathy.
Thanks, John. And I do want to say that I am trying to do the meeting protocol, but I'm just a farmer and this is very difficult for me. Anyway, my comment is the CSA model seems to have a really good working apprenticeship program and intern program. I've always found that their model is very, like, it's something that we should be looking at through all agriculture. Another comment is that I'm a farmer. I get up in the morning and I go to the barn just about 365 days a year, but the government doesn't class me as a farmer because I work for a larger farm owner. So as far as income tax, I don't get the tax benefits that a farm owner gets. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand. When I went to look at the large farms in Gray County, like on the Gray County website, there's a listing saying the largest employers in the agricultural sector. The company I work for doesn't even fall under agriculture. And we have a huge farm division. So I'm wondering if the sector isn't even, like, is larger than what we understand, because there's a lot of people on the fringes and maybe not even the fringes that aren't getting included as the agriculture sector, even in Gray County. Just a comment. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're kind of still dealing with Scott's item on the age-friendly community, but some good comments there. Brenda, you had a comment or a question for Scott still at this time?
It's sort of for Scott, sort of back to Philly and the whole FarmLink program. I just wanted to make a note that there have been these land linking organizations and projects around for longer than I have been farming, which at this point is like 13 years. So I think that the major barrier to having these things work is that, again, there's a financial barrier of actual succession because nobody's actually in the FarmLink thing to like give away their land to anyone, or at least their descendants won't let them. So there's partly that. And the other major issue, which I think could impact Gray County planning, is that there needs to be housing. There's a lot of people who are like, oh, sure, you can have 5 or 10 acres on my land. And what, they live in a tent for like 6 months of the year and try to do the work of farming while, you know, peeing in the tree line and that sort of thing. Like, it's really actually a major issue is being able to find good housing, because this is hard work, farming. To have to go to sleep in a tent or pee or shower outside while also trying to make farming work, like, it's, yeah, I've done this. I've been an intern on farms in the past. It was kind of fun when I was 33. I can't imagine doing that at 46. So I just want to point out that having housing available, reasonable, and also all year housing, because farming, as Kathy has just said, is not just for 6 months out of the year. It is most of the time 365 days. Part of that might be indoors planning, but you can't, for a lot of these young farmers, 6 months they live in a tent on a farm and try to like make an income to then pay for 6 months in a city to then plan their farm. Like, it's impossible. It is totally impossible. So housing is a major issue. So when we think of any of these FarmLink problems or linking people up, we really have to look at saying to these owners, if you really want to be part of the solution long-term to having new farmers on the land, you have to look at actually building good housing where you are willing to provide land for farming. So internet access as well. We already know that, but there you go.
Good. Thank you, Brenda. So yeah, Scott, there, as you can hear, there's lots of topics tying in from the group. So we certainly, I think it's a good idea to keep this issue on the agenda going forward and keep working with us and the group in general to provide support and input. Thank you. Can we move on to our next topic? I think we can. All right. Next on our agenda, we have Brian Plumstead from our tourism department. Brian, yeah, he's still here. Good. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair John, and welcome to all the members. I think most of the municipal members I know or have met. There's a few ag folks that we may not have had the chance to meet, so hopefully we will someday. And I'm here today to talk about our Cycling and Trails Master Plan, which is one of those projects that got a little bit hung up with COVID. We had just hosted our final public input session. I think it was March 12th of 2020, and then of course COVID hit. So we basically picked the ball up again in about August, finished off our consultation, took the plan to County Council, and it was passed in October. And along with passing it, County Council asked us to take it to each municipality or to offer them the chance to endorse the plan. So we're currently in that process. Out of our 9 municipalities, I think 3 have endorsed it. 3 are bringing it to their councils. We will be in Hanover next Monday night, I think, to present to Hanover Town Council. And then 3 municipalities, we just haven't really heard back from them, despite a couple of questions. So the plan is passed, and it's really a very, on one level, a very high level plan for pretty much active transportation across Grey County, with a focus on cycling. So on-road cycling is really where we did most of the work in the plan, and that was very much put up front, that was the intent. However, it does also speak to trails development and has something for trails. And ironically, of course, since COVID has hit, trails has sort of been the real hot button in Grey County. We've just been so busy at our trailheads, and so many people wanting to get outdoors, feeling that's the most safe activity. So trails seem to be a little bit busier even than cycling in some cases. So we are getting back to the table to finish our implementation of the plan. And really a couple of those steps. One is we have been sourcing some senior level government funding, which I guess we can't exactly say we have it, but it's so close we can smell it. So that will really go a long way to implementing a lot of the trail signage that's envisaged in the plan. We are also forming working groups for on-road cycling and a working group for trails. And then mapping all the cycling routes and deciding where to put signs in priority order is our next order of business. So while the plan is a very high level document, it also does have networks that are proposed in the plan. So most of those we tried to stay on county roads wherever possible, but in many cases, in order to create the network and to make it robust across the county for cycling, we did go on municipal roads. So certainly that is part of our next discussion, is where those are on municipal roads. You know, is the municipality okay with that? How can we work together to sign those routes and to get the plan in place? So right now we're, I think, about to head out with seeking members to sit on our working groups to engage our municipalities in more detailed planning. We've also had some concern, and it's really been expressed from the beginning for municipalities, around liability, safety, and maintenance. So if we put a assigned cycle route on a municipal road, what exactly does that mean with respect to those 3 areas? So we're looking to host a webinar with our municipal partners to really get the best and most up-to-date information on those 3 topics. So with that, I'm not sure if there's anything else I wanted to say, other than I think one of the certainly things we think about a lot with respect to agricultural users is, of course, cyclists are a road user along with farm equipment and machinery, with Mennonite buggies, where they're usually operating on the shoulder or the side of the road, so they share that in common. So any kind of safety messaging, safety programming, and working together on both for motorists, safe practices, and for all our alternate road users, that would be cyclists, farm machinery, et cetera, what are best practices to make sure the roads are safe for everybody. So that's something we're also working on. And I think that would be it. There is a link to all the documents in the report that was referenced, and I could just pop into the chat a link to, we have an initiatives page which provides a lot more detail than all the consultation that was taken and all the steps along the way, and good background information. And certainly open if there are any questions or specific questions through you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Brian, thank you for your presentation. Councillor Soever, you have a question or comment?
Yes, and thank you for that, Brian. I note that just the other week, Grey Highlands Council did not endorse the plan, and the resolution at county authorized staff to go ahead with implementation of the plan. And then there was an amendment brought by myself that supported by council that the thing be sent to the lower tiers for endorsement. How is Grey County not endorsing the plan going to affect the implementation?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, if I might, and then Kim, please feel free to come in after if I miss anything. I think our understanding, and I'm not sure that we've actually received the official resolution from Grey Highlands, but I believe the intent was they would like to seek more information, and particularly staff, talking to staff to get a bit more information. And specifically, I think it was around liability, sort of maintenance, safety, all those issues that I mentioned. So we really felt that it was always our intention to have those discussions with municipalities. And certainly I think Grey Highlands is, pushing us a bit that the time is now. Let's get on with it. Let's have those discussions. And so I think we took it as a, we need more information before we can endorse your plan. So I think that's the first point. And the second point is just, I guess we see a lot in the plan that's very high level, and we really ask municipalities if they could really consider it a policy document, a very high level document. It is not committing you to any of that line that's on the map on your road. We can't do anything on a municipal road without your permission. We'd like to have that conversation, but let's pass it high level, and then let's work together on implementation. And in some cases that might mean moving it off that road. There may be good cases, good causes why it shouldn't be, a road for cyclists.
All right, thank you, Brian. Any other questions, comments? No, don't see none. Okay.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I do see Lori and
Oh,
Billy.
there's a couple here now. Sorry,
Yes.
Lori, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Brian, for that information. That's great. And I'm happy that you've included farm implements as part of the alternate road users. As a point of clarification, we don't use the side of the road. We're told by MTO and police that we are to be on the traveling lane like other cars, etc. And so we don't have that in common with cyclists. I think we've been saying this for years, that we would love to see signage about being cautious of farm implements on the road, especially areas where when we're moving from one farm to another and we routinely have to turn left, those areas where we're doing that 2 or 3 times a day or whatever, we would love signage on those county roads that say, watch for left turning vehicles or something. Because when you go to turn, and you don't see anything, and then you look another time and the BMW is right behind you while you're trying to turn left, we're at fault when we make those left-hand turns. So if there could be some consideration about signage for some farm areas, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Philly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Yes, Laurie, my hand was up because in fact, this is something that we are going to be addressing this year. I don't know if it will be signage, but again, through our Tri-County partnership with Bruce and Simcoe counties, we are currently working on a campaign that we expect to last 3 years. And it will be adjacent to what tourism is doing with respect to road safety and Share the Road, but it will be specifically around agricultural vehicles. And we are waiting for a quote on the campaign deliverables and parameters from Canvas Studios, and they have been working with Bruce County on their campaign specifically around vehicles passing and safe road practice up the Bruce Peninsula. So they are well versed in this. And we are looking to a number of community partners to assist us with funding. And we are looking to the messaging that is already in market through OFA, through the OPP, and with other community partners that have been thinking about this. And that has all been delivered to Canvas Studios for consideration in their messaging. And what we think is the great opportunity here is that through the voice and reach of our communications department and our tourism department, we're going to be able to reach a lot of people. In the past, some of our messaging around farm equipment safety has been more targeted towards the farming community, and we really want to make sure it gets to everybody. So we're going to lean on tourism and partner with tourism to make sure the message gets out. And as I say, we're hoping that it will last for 3 years.
All right, thank you, Philly. Brian?
Great, and just to build on that, the town of the Blue Mountains certainly was a great partner in working on developing the cycling safety message, and always they were very conscious of their agricultural road users as well. So that I know that's something that they've been looking at signage that would include, say, a farm tractor with a cyclist for Share the Road. So that's a group I think that could be a key partner going forward, because they've certainly looked at that. And also just educating us all, because thank you, Laurie, for correcting me. I was a little off base there, but that's exactly, I think, part of the problem is that everybody doesn't really know the rules of the road really well for cyclists, for buggies, for farm equipment. So that is so important to reinforce.
All right, thank you. Any more questions or comments for Brian at this time? We're good. All right. Well, wish all the best with your project. I think it definitely has some opportunity. As a cyclist, or maybe former cyclist, I've traveled many of the roads, and yes, there are obstacles along the way. So, you know, safety is a huge concern when it comes to cycling, but definitely huge opportunities, especially through that Blue Mountain area. It's among the best cycling in Ontario as far as I'm concerned. Wish you all the best there, Brian. Thank you. Next on our plan.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I do see Councillor Soever with his hand.
Oh, Councillor Soever. Could you turn on your mic, sir?
Sorry, I just wanted to advise the committee I have a hard stop at 11:30. I have to attend a meeting on vaccination clinics. So my apologies, but I'll be leaving the meeting at 11:30.
Well, thank you for attending, and hope to hear from you again.
Well, I'll make sure I catch up on this.
Good, thank you. We're going to turn it over to Philly with the update on the abattoir research.
You're there. Excellent. Thank you.
Philly, just before you start, you were cutting in and out your sound a little bit. I'm not sure if everybody can hear Philly, but
okay, I'll get a little closer. Is this sounding better?
That's perfect.
Excellent. It's just a matter of being loud, and I have no problem being loud. So the quick update on abattoir research is that Steve Furness and I continue to monitor what is happening provincially and nationally and regionally with respect to abattoir development. We are waiting for the final report from Meat and Poultry Ontario. They did a major survey across the province asking what farmers need and also what abattoirs and processors are experiencing. So we're waiting for those findings. I'm hoping we're going to see them soon. I've been in touch with Alex Ripley at Huron County and Carissa Downey at Dufferin County. Huron recently released a business case for abattoir development that they did as part of a project looking at 5 sectors. And they are currently waiting to see if anyone is interested in investing there. So I'm keeping my eyes and ears open because an investment in Huron could potentially have benefits for our producers. Likewise, in Dufferin County, they did a feasibility study into a processing facility, not an abattoir, but for all post-kill processing. And they are likely moving forward on supporting the development of processing. So all of those things would change the environment in Grey County. So we're in a bit of a hurry up and wait. Steve and I met with Mallet Group. Mallet Group is a consulting organization in Elora that works extensively with abattoirs of all sizes, whether they are local and inspected at the OMAFRA level or they are CFIA, and they really are the best local knowledge keepers. The day that we had our consultation, the CEO of the company had just broken his leg. So our consultation was shorter than anticipated. So we are going to reschedule and have another conversation. But what we are trying to do is get from them information on what Grey's particular strategic advantage would be and what we can offer over other regions in order to attract business here. So Steve is working on that side, and I'm working on the side where I'm communicating with the producers to make sure I understand what the producer needs are. So it's an ongoing process, nothing new to report specifically in Grey, but there is definitely movement afoot in the region.
Thank you, Philly. Well, we have a question there, Councillor Soever, comment?
Bit of a comment. We have an abattoir here, which there's a zoning application in to rezone it as a contractor's yard. Now, that obviously would remove one, permitted site. So I've been dealing with my director of planning on that. And in advance of this meeting, he suggested maybe something that could be done to review, all the buffering requirements and things as far as and look at potential sites that may be applicable. Like when you're looking is what is available once you put in place the required buffers and the services and everything that's needed. Really so that, we have a feel for, what are the opportunities actually on various, countywide in terms of a potential, like what are the restrictions and, in terms of even the official plan. I'm not sure what's in there. I haven't had time to look. That being said, this site is an abattoir. It was used more recently just as a meat store, not a major butchering facility. They did butcher their own wild game, which they had nearby, but certainly, you hate to lose permitted, sites that, if the zoning is changed to make it a contractor's yard, changing it back will be very difficult. And so I think we do need to look at planning issues around these. And that being said, I'm told also that the facility, if it was inspected, it wouldn't meet the requirements for a modern abattoir. So, it may not be practical to retain it at that site because, the requirements have changed. But given that there are all these requirements, I think that's something we need to look at and figure out, where abattoirs can be accommodated and make sure that we try to, zone accordingly.
All right, thank you, Councillor.
2 minutes, and I'm glad I got that in.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Philly. did you have anything to add to that, or you were good with that on that report? Thank you. Next item on our agenda is the Agriculture Specialist High Skills Major Partnership. Philly, you're commenting on that as well, I believe.
Yes, and another short report. I am excited to say that we are going to have a meeting on site at Grey Roots on Monday to walk through with representatives from the Blue Water District School Board, the county, so economic developments, planning, CAO, and Grey Roots staff will all be on site. And we are just going to do a first sweep to take a look at what might be doable in the first phase. And then after we do that site visit, we are going to have a large group meeting where we bring all the community partners back to the table, including the people involved in the agricultural demonstration site project next door, because a number of the functions of the agricultural high skills major can happen at the museum on Grey Roots grounds, but some cannot because they don't work within the historical parameters of the Morston Village site. So some of those activities may have to move next door. So once we have a site visit and have a better idea of what is permitted and possible, then we're going to be able to bring the plan outwards and bring all our community members to the table. So we're very excited to do that. That may not happen again until September, early September, simply because of the way the school year falls, but there is forward movement and a lot of goodwill.
All right, thank you. This time.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I do see Kathy with her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Kathy, we'll start with you. Go ahead.
Thanks, John. Philly, I was thinking about your presentation on this after our last meeting, and I did have a couple questions, and that had to do with busing and getting kids to the site. And the other concern I had was that the marginal kids, and I don't know a better way to say that, but the kids that don't understand that agriculture is a good career option for them because they've never been exposed. With that site, and it sounds wonderful to have it all in with the museum and everything, are we limiting the kids that can access it? And maybe that's something that you need to get back to this committee on. It's just that's my thoughts on it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to address those. Those are both concerns that the school board is well aware of. And in fact, they came to us because they believe that the Grey Roots site is actually going to make the program more accessible to more students for transportation reasons. Currently, there are only about a dozen students that are participating at the Chesley site because without the high school being in proximity, everybody has to find their own transportation there. And they are thinking that because Owen Sound is a regional hub for busing, it will be very easy for them to bring people down to the Grey Roots site if they can get into Owen Sound. And you know, that program was generally on an annual basis attracting about 24 students. And in the last couple of years, it has attracted a dozen simply because there hasn't been the critical mass and there hasn't been transportation. So it's very much on their radar. And with respect to career guidance and development, this is also something the school board is well aware of, and they understand the pressures on the sector and on the community and the need to retain youth. And they are committed to doing more promotion of agriculture as a viable sector for youth. So these are definitely concerns that we are talking about.
Thank you, Philly. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I know this is a very important item of interest to this advisory committee, and it's demonstrated because it is a standing agenda item. And as there is going to be a stakeholder consultation event that's taking place, I'm wondering if there's merit in perhaps having a representative from this Grey County Agriculture Advisory Committee attend and represent on our behalf. And if there is merit, perhaps there could be consideration today of anybody that's interested, and we could pass a motion that gives the individual, I guess, the legitimacy or the authority for attending. Just wondered if that was of interest to this committee at this time.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Philly, do we need to have this next meeting and understand a few more details about what the trajectory is of this, and then we could bring that back? It might make it easier to make a decision about whether there's one person or several that might want to be part of this discussion. I just think we just have a few more details to sort out. Is that your read of it?
Yes, that is my read. The nature of the committee is changing with every meeting as we get a better sense of who really needs to be there in terms of boots on the ground to make the project go forward, and also who is going to provide that advisory function. And this will be our third meeting, and already we have probably 50% of the people have changed, because with the first two meetings, we had a better idea of who should be around the table, and we're still in that process.
Yeah.
And yes, I would agree. Let's have the walkthrough. Let's have a fulsome discussion and then bring people to the table. We absolutely have a commitment to bring the agricultural communities to the table, the OFA, other groups. So that's in place. We just have not formalized it in any way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Philly. Christine?
Yeah, just by way of follow-up, that sounds great. It's something, as I said, is important to the committee, and if we could have that additional information to determine if we are appropriate for being at the table, and who, and I expect we will be, and who has the interest, and have that consideration with all the information before us. So I guess we'll, as this is a standing item, we'll see it on the next agenda. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Robson. All right. Thank you, Philly, for your report, and we'll look forward to any further communication on this. Were there any other comments, questions for this item? Okay. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, our March minutes are not included in this particular agenda, but I just wanted to reference, we had a number of discussion items under other business, sector representatives, information sharing on important issues / challenges or opportunities. And I was wondering if there was consideration by this committee to also include this as a standing item, because as we have our discussions and our actions, maybe there are some tangible things that we're doing that we can accomplish within the time frame of meeting. So we talk about different legislation, livestock health, climate change, a whole bunch of items. So if that is a standing item and almost our action plan that we can address, at least it will be acknowledged every meeting, and we'll see the tangible results that we're having from this committee. Just a suggestion, wondering what others thought.
Yeah, we'll certainly entertain any items that you'd like to add on the agenda. Councillor Robinson, you could forward to me, and I could forward to Grey County if that works.
Well, I was just wondering if, based on the minutes from March 18th, there's quite a bit of discussion under other business, and there's that whole section of different items, and there's sort of a listing of action approaches that we could take. So wondering if that could be just pulled over and put on our subsequent agendas.
I definitely think that would be possible. What's the group think of that suggestion? Any comments on there? Well, go ahead.
Sorry. Mr. Chair, if I might, the discussion at the last meeting was very good. There was a lot of information provided at that meeting. And I think as staff, we're trying to bring those items forward as discussion topics like we did today with the climate change and the age friendly and the cycling strategy. So we will work through those items and include those on upcoming agendas with this committee for sure.
All right, appreciate that. Yeah, there was a ton of information there, and
Yes.
I'm sure we didn't get everything solved at that meeting or maybe single future meetings, but we'll keep plugging away at it. Thank you. Other business, I think there was one item, and Lori might want to comment on that. It was the Bill C-156. There was some movement on that just recently, Lori, is that correct?
Actually, it was clarified yesterday through the Federation of Agriculture that Bill 156 has been passed, I guess almost for a year now, and it is actually a law, a trespass law that has teeth, it's enforceable, and police are being trained on how to work with any protesters that show up on farms, etc. So Federation of Agriculture is not requiring any sort of campaign or letters of support at this time. It is a law. I think when we met in March, there was some press behind some of the activist groups who were saying that this was an infringement on their freedom of speech, etc. The protests have quieted somewhat at this point, and so the Federation of Agriculture feel that there's no requirement on our end to do anything in terms of helping write letters, etc. So we're good at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lori. Other items for new business, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I would like to extend a congratulations to Lori Smith on receiving the 2021 Tommy Cooper Award. And as we all know, the award, this esteemed award, goes to a person who has contributed to the betterment of agriculture and to rural living in both Grey and Bruce counties. So extremely well done, and congratulations, Lori.
Thank you. I'm blushing if you can't see. Thank you.
Yeah, on everybody within the group there, Lori, congratulations. I'd say it's about high time too, so well deserved, well deserved. Thank you. Any other items under new business? Oh, I got Philly. I see you've got your hand up there. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add to the discussion of farm trespass, this is something that we looked at quite closely since our last meeting, and I have been in consultation with our CAO and our legal counsel at the county, and yes, we made the decision to also sit on any kind of support or letter writing at this time. However, what I can say is that our tourism department has launched a campaign as of last week called Rediscover Responsibly, and that is directly related to the parameters around COVID and travel changing. And it is all about respectful behavior when visiting. And two of the items on the poster, which I would be happy to forward to the committee, are specific to respecting agriculture and respecting farm properties. So I will briefly read those. There is one that says, "Do not trespass. Please respect public and private landowners. It's a privilege to explore the area and trails. Ensure you obey all signs and boundaries and follow proper trail etiquette." So that's the trespass. And then there is one that says, "Respect nature, agriculture, and wildlife." And it goes on to say, "Avoid disturbing the natural habitat, farmland, or crops, and refrain from feeding any wildlife you encounter. Do not approach or touch farm animals." And this is being widely promoted. And it is available as a poster, and it is going to be reproduced as signage. And then we're also doing an extensive social media campaign where each of the 5 bullet points will be broken out into a small message. So there will be 2 messages specific to respecting farms and farm property that we're going to be communicating, and in fact are communicating now.
Excellent. Good work. Lori.
Further to Philly's comments, yeah, I guess when I was speaking with OFA yesterday and we're talking about trespassing, we were thinking about animal activist groups, but there has been a lot of concern coming through our office about people visiting Grey County of late and just walking through farmers' fields as if they're parks. And they don't understand that they're not public properties, even when they have trespassing signs on them. So that is a major concern. So thank you, Philly, for doing the work that you're doing and the rest of your group. The other is a question with regards to kind of how our group operates here. When the agendas are created, is there an opportunity that the ag representatives can contribute or give ideas for what maybe are pertinent items to be added to the agenda for that particular meeting? Thank you.
Heather, go ahead there.
Absolutely. You are the representatives for this sector. So if there's something that you'd like staff to add to the agenda, by all means, please send it to myself or Kathy Nuno, and we would be happy to add it to the agenda. If there's supporting documentation, etc., then please provide that to us as well, so we can provide that to the committee. And we do try and get our agendas out in a timely fashion. So the sooner we receive it, the better. The agendas are normally out 1 week prior to the meeting. So if we have that information at least 2 weeks prior to it, that would be very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks. That was it, Lori, or did you have another? Oh, her hand's gone. Good. All right. Any other items for, at this point, new business items, suggestions, comments? Reference items, do we have to cover them?
No, those are just there for the committee's information.
Okay, there was one for information only, and it seemed of some interest. The Lorraine Sutton nitrous oxide with Globe and Mail article. We could not access it, or at least I could not, and maybe other people had the ability to access that. I was gonna look into that.
I apologize. I'll make sure that it gets sent out with the minutes to the.
Okay, sounded interesting. All right. Any other comments at this time? We're good. So next meeting, the date will likely be set. Are we looking at a 3-month time frame again, Heather?
Understanding that summer is very, very busy for this group, we will be looking at later in September.
Okay, we'll look forward to hearing that. And then at this time, I'd like to adjourn or call for a motion to adjourn the meeting. Could I have somebody to move and second? Brenda, and seconder RJ. All right, meeting is adjourned. I'd like to thank everybody for their participation and lots of good comments. So keep the information flowing and hopefully talk to you all again. Take care.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.